Soundgarden and Audioslave are just part of Chris Cornell's story, but what was his life really like? We've got everything you ever wanted to know.
If the inspiring friendship between Chris Cornell and Chester Bennington doesn't make you tear up, the way their stories ended will. Here's what you need to know about the bond between these fallen stars. Before the two even met, Chris Cornell had already made a huge impact on Chester Bennington's life, all thanks to his work with Soundgarden. In an interview with Metal Hammer, the Linkin Park frontman explained, "I grew up listening to Soundgarden, Alice in Chains, Nirvana. I don't think any music scene influenced me as much as the scene that came out of Seattle. There was so much great music that came out of Seattle at that time, so it was really cool for me to be out there with one of my heroes, and we got along really well." Groups like Soundgarden inspired Bennington and his bandmates to form Linkin Park, which led to a similar level of fame for the rock stars. Years later, the singer commented more than once about how his times performing with Cornell were some of the best experiences of his life.
I've been a huge fan of Chris, and to be able to do this is we're blessed.
In 2002, Linkin Park started a new multi-genre tour called Project Revolution, which was continued over several years due to its popularity. Chris Cornell joined the fifth one in 2007, so it was around that time that he was introduced to Chester Bennington. The Linkin Park singer told Metal Hammer, "We'd bring in tons of different acts, and Chris Cornell was on one of our tours. I think this was when we were touring Minutes to Midnight. Anyway, we met then. We got along really well right away." During Project Revolution, Cornell joined Bennington on stage for a duet version of numerous songs, including a cover of Temple of the Dog's Hunger Strike. Bennington also talked about the memorable experience of singing the hit with his new friend and said, "It's kind of funny, but my wife would always tease me because when Chris and I would do that song, we would always stare at each other. She'd be like, 'Look at you guys staring at each other on stage all night.' That was just because of my admiration for him as a person and as a performer and the friendship we were developing. He was just really special. It was a special time." During the Project Revolution tour, Chester Bennington and Chris Cornell grew to be such good friends that they basically became family. Cornell then honored Bennington with a request to signify the strong bond they had formed. The Linkin Park singer explained to Metal Hammer, "We stayed in touch, and that developed into Chris and Vicky asking me to be the godfather of their son, Christopher. One of my favorite memories of our friendship was the baptism and the christening, and taking on that promise to the family. That was really great." Their second child, Christopher Nicholas, was born a few years before in 2005 and was the only son of the couple. Both Cornell and his wife most likely felt that asking Bennington to take on that role was a great way to show how much he had meant to both of them once he entered their lives. Bennington deeply enjoyed simply spending time with Cornell. When asked what his favorite memories of their friendship were, he answered, "Obviously, the christening of their son Christopher and being invited into the family. That was really special. Definitely the times we had just hanging out, which were very few and far between. Sitting by the pool with the kids, just kind of talking." A major factor that cemented the bond between Bennington and Cornell was that not only did they hit it off, but their wives Vicky and Talinda did as well. When talking to Metal Hammer, Bennington explained, "I don't know if you've ever had this experience, but sometimes you meet somebody and it's like you've known them forever. And that was really the case between our families. I think if it was just me and Chris talking, hanging out, we would be good acquaintances. But the friendship between our wives, you add that into the mix and things escalate a little bit more." Talinda and Vicky were not in the public eye as much as their rock star husbands, but there are still glimpses into their lives that clearly show they all felt the same way as Bennington. Because some people in this world have a sickening lack of empathy, Vicky endured despicable abuse from trolls online after the tragic passing of her husband. Talinda was quick to support her friend and tweeted, "I am deeply saddened by humanity. I just came across a stream of people tweeting vile lies about Chris Cornell, his death, and his wife. Disgusting. It's crossing a line so deep for me. That's my family. Show some respect." It's clear that Chris Cornell was hugely impressed with Chester Bennington for his dedication to their craft. In an interview with Rolling Stone, the Soundgarden frontman was asked about the impact that live music made on his life, and he instantly thought of a performance of Bennington's that inspired him. Cornell said, "When we toured Australia, Chester broke his wrist on the third song, and then finished the whole set with a broken wrist. That kind of dedication and passion, this is what I'm doing. This is the most important thing there is. I'm on stage right now. That affects me." Like a good friend, Cornell also said things to Bennington that truly lifted him up. The Linkin Park singer gave a great example of this to Metal Hammer that was both funny and heartwarming. When Cornell told him he'd have to sing the more difficult part of their duet, Bennington explained, "Doing Hunger Strike with Chris, and I had to hit the really high parts. The best compliment I ever got was from Chris. After we did it, he left and said, 'Dude, you're not supposed to be able to do that, man. I made you sing that on purpose so you wouldn't do it as well.' So that was a huge compliment to me." As the lead singers of massively successful bands, Linkin Park, Soundgarden and Audioslave, along with their numerous side projects, both Chester Bennington and Chris Cornell were not able to spend as much time with all of their friends as they would have liked. But the two men understood this, and the dedication both had to their families was just another thing they had in common that made their friendship even stronger. In the interview with Metal Hammer, Bennington described the rare yet special times the two were able to hang out and said, "Whenever they were in town, we would try to connect. Sometimes it was difficult because we were all so busy. Chris and I were similar in many ways in that we had a lot of dear friends, but we didn't necessarily see them all the time because our personal lives are so busy and our dedication to our families is so strong." One thing Bennington and Cornell shared was their experiences with addiction throughout much of their lives. In 2009, the Linkin Park frontman gave a very candid interview with Noise Creep and admitted, "My life was falling apart in many ways that I was writing about on this record in terms of getting divorced, in terms of diving very hard into alcohol and drugs throughout this process." Crawling is probably the most literal song lyrically I'd ever written for Linkin Park, and that's about feeling like I had no control over myself in terms of drugs and alcohol. Similarly, Cornell talked briefly about his addiction issues that really began in his 20s, as he explained to Spin in 2006. "Unfortunately, being a child of two alcoholics, I started drinking a lot, and that's what eventually got me back into drugs. You often hear that pot leads to harder drugs, but I think alcohol is what leads you to everything, because it takes away the fear. The worst drug experimentation I ever did was because I was drunk and didn't care." Cornell got to a better place in 2003, but a shoulder injury got him addicted to benzodiazepine after he was prescribed Ativan by a physician in 2016.
In retrospect, I've learned that it's not supposed to be given to anybody who's in recovery.
On May 17, 2017, Chris Cornell tragically died by suicide in a Detroit hotel room. Upon learning the fate of the beloved rock star, his family was absolutely devastated by the loss. This included Chester Bennington, whose close friendship with Cornell practically made him a member as well. The Linkin Park frontman was deeply saddened by the loss and wrote a long, heartfelt tribute letter on Twitter that said, "Thoughts of you flooded my mind and I wept. I'm still weeping with sadness as well as gratitude for having shared some very special moments with you and your beautiful family. You have inspired me in many ways you could never have known. Your talent was pure and unrivaled. Your voice was joy and pain, anger and forgiveness, love and heartache, all wrapped up into one. I suppose that's what we all are. You helped me understand that." Bennington also added, "I can't imagine a world without you in it. I pray you find peace in the next life. I send my love to your wife and your children, friends, and family. Thank you for allowing me to be part of your life. With all my love." The late singer's wife, Vicky, and the Cornell family suspected that the Ativan Chris was prescribed had a terribly negative effect on his actions, and that he may still be here if it were not for the drug.
I don't think that he could make any decisions because of the level of impairment.
Linkin Park was already scheduled to perform their song Heavy on Jimmy Kimmel Live when Chester Bennington heard the heartbreaking news that Chris Cornell had passed.
In light of our dear friend Chris Cornell passing away, we decided to play our song One More Light.
When talking to Metal Hammer, Bennington explained his struggle to get through the show and said, "I got to sing through that a few times, break down, cry a little bit, pull myself together." Although Bennington admitted it was difficult to perform, his bandmate Mike Shinoda revealed to Radio.com that the singer downplayed how hard it was for him. Shinoda said, "When we were doing a sound check, Chester couldn't even make it through the song. He was getting halfway through and getting choked up. And even when we did play the whole song, and it was live on TV or taped for film for TV, he kind of just stopped towards the end like he missed the last couple lines, just couldn't finish the song." Cornell's widow Vicky asked Bennington to perform at her late husband's funeral, and the Linkin Park frontman accepted without hesitation. Because of his previous tribute to his friend on Jimmy Kimmel Live, Bennington felt more emotionally prepared for the performance. The singer really wanted to come up with the best song to honor Cornell, so he prayed for help in making the decision until he chose a perfect option. Bennington explained to Metal Hammer, "I knew from our conversations that he'd been friends with Jeff Buckley, and they were close, so I felt that Hallelujah would be a good song. It's my favorite song of all time. I think it's the best song that's ever been written. In all of the versions that have been done, Jeff Buckley's is my favorite. So that was a nice tie, somebody that Chris was close to." After Bennington's rendition of the popular Leonard Cohen song, Cornell's two daughters, Lily and Tony, also performed to honor their father. It was a heartbreaking event for all of them to take part in, but the singer felt his friend would have liked the way it turned out. Only 2 months after the death of Chris Cornell, Chester Bennington died by suicide as well, on what had been the 53rd birthday of his close friend. Similar to how drugs may have played a role in the tragic passing of Cornell, traces of either MDMA or methamphetamines were found in Bennington's blood, along with a small amount of alcohol. One silver lining to the horrible tragedies was that through the friendship of the two men, their wives and families became incredibly close and had each other throughout all of the deep sadness. Vicky Cornell wrote on Twitter, "Just when I thought my heart couldn't break anymore, I love you, T." Like her mother, Lily Cornell was heartbroken over Bennington's death and tweeted, "I love you so much. Thank you for always being there for me and my family. Thank you for being the kindest human being imaginable. And thank you for your legendary voice. There is a gaping hole in the world without you." Unfortunately, Bennington's widow, Talinda, had to deal with sick people on social media, but Vicky supported her friend just as the other had done for her months before. She wrote, "Sadly empathize with Talinda B. Cruel, malicious, baseless attacks, but when they go low, we go high. I love you, T." Talinda responded shortly after, "God gave us our husbands, our babies, and each other. We will always stand back to back and heart to heart. We travel this road together. I love you."
Chris Cornell's voice took him far in life. He became a rock god as the lead singer of Soundgarden and Audioslave, but his time on Earth ultimately ended tragically prematurely. Here's a look at what the final 12 months of his life were like. Cornell occasionally wrote music for films, and one of his contributions was the song The Promise for the 2017 movie of the same name, which stars Oscar Isaac and Christian Bale. The plot of the film covers the Armenian genocide, which happened at the same time as World War I. Beginning in 1915, the Ottoman government of Turkey ordered the deaths of as many as 1.5 million Armenians, as well as the expulsion of thousands more. The Promise director Terry George commissioned Cornell to compose and perform a song for the film's soundtrack. Cornell then researched the subject by reading extensively and watching documentaries, which ended up haunting him. He aimed for his song to convey a message of hope. As he told Billboard, "The hope was built into the story. To me, the challenge was being able to distill it in a couple of verses and a chorus." Cornell donated any money he received from The Promise to the International Rescue Committee, an organization that helps political refugees and people trying to escape countries in conflict. The song also ultimately earned him a Grammy nomination for Best Rock Song. Cornell is, of course, primarily known for his singing career, during which he was the frontman of 3 different rock bands, Temple of the Dog, Soundgarden, and Audioslave. He also kept up a prolific solo career, as he released 4 solo albums between 1999 and 2015, Euphoria Morning, Carry On, Scream, and Higher Truth. The last one sold fairly well, peaking at number 19 on the Billboard album chart and generating the rock radio hit Nearly Forgot My Broken Heart. Clearly, the masses wanted plenty of Chris Cornell, and he obliged as he headed out on tour to promote Higher Truth. The latter part of 2015 saw him play in theaters and concert halls in the US, Australia, and New Zealand. Then, in early 2016, he played throughout Scandinavia and Western Europe, including a 4-night stand at London's Royal Albert Hall. He ultimately returned to North America for another leg that kept him on the road playing shows for much of the summer. A few months before Soundgarden released its commercial breakthrough Bad Motorfinger in 1991, Chris Cornell had already emerged onto the scene with Temple of the Dog, a supergroup consisting of members of Soundgarden and Pearl Jam. Temple of the Dog released a self-titled album in 1991 that featured the hit song Hunger Strike. The album served as a tribute to the late Andrew Wood, frontman of Seattle band Mother Love Bone and a close friend of Cornell's. Wood had died in 1990 of a drug overdose. Temple of the Dog was a project with a specific goal in mind that existed in a specific period in time. It was formed by people who went on to much bigger things, so the fact that the band ended up reuniting was a bit of a surprise. Cornell had occasionally joined Pearl Jam on stage over the years, but it wasn't until November 2016 that Temple of the Dog staged a full-scale reunion tour. They played 5 American cities, and Cornell hoped it would be a cathartic experience. He told The Guardian, I didn't deal well with Andy's death. After he died, numerous times I'd be driving and I would look out the window and I thought I saw him. It would take me 5 minutes to update to the moment and realize, no, he's actually dead. This tour, in a sense, is the dealing. It's facing the reality. After revisiting Temple of the Dog, the Chris Cornell greatest hits wave continued when he got back together with Audioslave, which originally formed in 2001 when Cornell joined up with 3 former members of Rage Against the Machine. They released 3 best-selling albums in the 2000s and dominated rock radio with hits like Show Me How to Live, Cochise, and Like a Stone. They were nowhere near as politically minded as Rage Against the Machine, but they made their feelings known when they reunited after some time apart. On January 20th, 2017, the same day as Donald Trump's presidential inauguration, Audioslave helped organize the anti-inaugural ball, a star-studded protest in the form of a concert in Los Angeles. It was a decidedly informal affair for Cornell and his bandmates. A quick sound check served as their only rehearsal before they performed a 3-song set. According to guitarist Tom Morello, the entire reunion was Cornell's idea. In the last year of his life, Cornell played and recorded a lot of music, including contributing covers of a couple of well-known songs for 2 very different projects. HBO's short-lived 2016 drama Vinyl, set around a fading 70s record label, featured rock stars doing their takes on old rock and pop gems in each episode. Cornell's contribution was a version of Stay With Me Baby, which was originally recorded by Lorraine Ellison in 1966. He told Vulture, "I was very honored to be asked. I got to pay tribute to Terry Reid, whose version of the song has been a favorite of mine for many years, and be included on a great soundtrack with an amazing group of artists." Also in 2016, Cornell contributed to the animated Netflix series Beat Bugs. The show was built around the music of the Beatles and featured a group of 5 bugs, including actual Beatles, learning important life lessons and morals. The soundtrack consisted of Fab Four favorites performed by high-profile musician guests like Pink, Rod Stewart, and Cornell, who earned the privilege of singing Drive My Car while the Beat Bugs danced around. In 2012, Soundgarden reunited after 15 years apart with a few concert dates and the release of a brand new album, King Animal. It worked out so well that Cornell, guitarist Kim Thayil, drummer Matt Cameron, and bassist Ben Shepherd reconvened once more. They had some very ambitious plans in place for 2017, another new record, a tour, and digging into their vault. In April of that year, Cornell told Billboard that they were halfway through writing the new album. Each band member had been writing and recording potential tracks on their own. Thayil told Billboard, "There's some songs that have been demoed. I think Matt's demoed some things completely, stuff he's recorded on his computer. Chris has demoed a few things. He's written lyrics for ideas that I've written and that Ben and Matt have written." Thayil also noted that they were looking into issuing various unreleased recordings, such as excised material from Screaming Life, the band's debut 1987 EP. While those projects have yet to materialize, Soundgarden did tour throughout the spring of 2017, which Cornell seemed to be excited about. He told Billboard, "What I look forward to the most, because I tour so much, especially the last couple of years by myself, is the camaraderie. It's what we missed when we weren't a band." Iconic singer-songwriter Johnny Cash was a big influence on Cornell. The Man in Black even covered the Soundgarden song Rusty Cage in 1996. Cornell once said of him, "I met Cash once or twice in my life, and he was so gracious, and he was such an influence on me as a musician."
Since that time, I felt like he's maybe one of the bigger presences in my life in terms of an artist that I'm a fan of.
Cornell was such a big fan of Cash that shortly before he died, he adapted 2 of his poems and added original music to create a ballad called You Never Knew My Mind. It appeared on Forever Words, a collection of Cash's little-known non-musical works set to melodies, released in April 2018. It marked the first time Cornell's voice was heard on a record since his passing. Johnny Cash's son and Forever Words co-producer John Carter Cash said, "Chris took the 2 pieces and put them together in this one. I can't listen to it without it laying me down." In 2004, Cornell married his second wife, Vicky, and they went on to have 2 children together, a daughter named Tony, born in 2004, and a son named Christopher, born in 2005. It wasn't long before Tony Cornell and her father began collaborating on some musical projects. She wrote a song called Faraway Places when she was just 12 years old, which her dad recorded and produced at his home studio in Florida. The song was later released in a 2019 short film made by a Cornell family friend. In 2015, Chris had accompanied his daughter in her first ever public performance as they played Bob Marley's Redemption song together at the Beacon Theater in New York City. In a poignant Father's Day gesture in 2018, Tony released to YouTube her duet with her late father of the Prince song Nothing Compares to You. Soundgarden hit the road in spring 2017 with Cornell at the fore, and the tour arrived in Detroit for a May 17th date at the Fox Theater. The Detroit Free Press covered the performance and reported, "It was clear that something wasn't right with the 52-year-old Cornell. He often staggered back and forth across the stage and seemed weak in his movements. Just one or two songs in, it was as if the energy had exited his body, and what was left was a shell of a man scrambling to do his job." Cornell also reportedly forgot lyrics on more than one occasion, and his vocals weren't in sync with the music. At one point, he wandered off stage, leaving the rest of the band to vamp with their instruments until he returned. They finished their set with the downbeat 1991 track Slaves and Bulldozers, intercut with elements of Led Zeppelin's In My Time of Dying, and thus ended Soundgarden's last show and Cornell's final performance before the tragic events of later that night. Following Soundgarden's show at Detroit's Fox Theater, Chris Cornell headed straight to his hotel room at the MGM Grand. That's when bodyguard Martin Kirsten helped him with a computer issue and then gave him 2 doses of an anti-anxiety medication. At around 11:30 p.m., Cornell took a brief call from his wife Vicky, who noticed that his speech seemed slurred and that he sounded overly sleepy. He repeatedly assured her that he was just tired.
He was slurring his speech a lot.
So at that point, you were thinking, you've got to get him help.
Yes.
At midnight, Vicky called Kirsten to have him check on her husband, but he found Cornell's room locked. He kicked down the door, only to find the bathroom door locked as well. After kicking down the second door, he discovered Cornell on the floor unresponsive, not breathing, blood coming out of his mouth, and an exercise band firmly tied around his neck. An EMS unit arrived on the scene and a medical professional performed CPR on Cornell, but without success. At 1:30 a.m., a doctor pronounced Cornell dead, after which homicide detectives arrived to investigate while another officer called Vicky to tell her that her husband had passed away. He was only 52 years old. According to a police report regarding the scene of Chris Cornell's death, Vicky Cornell told police that her husband was a recovering drug addict. Indeed, he had long struggled with substance abuse, and Vicky told ABC News that her husband had suffered a relapse in his sobriety in 2016. However, according to authorities, drugs didn't seem to actually play a significant role in his death.
My husband was the furthest thing from a rock star junkie. He just wasn't.
Chris Cornell began his music career in the mid-'80s with the iconic group Soundgarden. The band was one of the pioneers in the grunge scene in Seattle, and over the years, he also collaborated with a number of other legendary musicians. He released his first solo album, Euphoria Morning, in 1999. Cornell's interest in music started at an early age, and he got his first drum kit when he was 15 years old. According to the musician, his mother only bought him a snare drum, and he purchased the rest of the drum kit soon after. In an interview with Louder Sound, he remembered, "My mom was ecstatic because it was the first thing I'd done on my own, which wasn't illegal or troublesome." Cornell eventually dropped out of school to pursue a music career, and he worked as a docker and waiter to support himself while performing small gigs at night. Soundgarden was formed in 1984, and as Chris Cornell recalled, the band was not an instant hit. He told Louder Sound, "People hated us in the beginning. I'd come on stage with no shirt on, whipping my hair around, and generally being a sweaty rock guy." The band released the demo 6 Songs for Bruce in 1985, and 3 years later, the studio album Ultra Mega OK debuted. Soundgarden was well known in the Seattle grunge scene by then, but it wasn't until their 1994 album, Super Run Known, that they gained worldwide fame. The third single from Super Run Known, Black Hole Sun, has since become one of the band's most popular songs. It spent 7 weeks at the #1 position on the Billboard Mainstream Rock Tracks chart and reached top 10 positions in different countries as well. Cornell wrote Black Hole Sun in his basement, and initially the band had doubts about whether or not it was even a Soundgarden song. It was certainly different from the tracks they had previously released, but eventually the band decided to go with it. In 1995, Soundgarden took home a Grammy Award for Best Hard Rock Performance for their work on the song. In 2017, the band embarked on a U.S. tour after a lengthy hiatus. They had just performed a show at the Fox Theater in Detroit, Michigan. Little did they know, however, that it would be their last performance with Cornell. Shortly after the concert, the singer headed back to his room at the MGM Grand Detroit Hotel and called his wife Vicky. She asked Cornell what he took after noticing that he was slurring, to which he answered, "An extra Ativan or 2. Later that night, Vicky asked Cornell's bodyguard, Martin Kristen, to check on her husband. Kristen headed to Cornell's room and found the door locked. He kicked it open and discovered an unresponsive Cornell inside the bathroom. And then we,
we, um, we, 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 I mean, that was it.
Cornell was pronounced dead at 1:30 a.m. on May 18, 2017. He was 52 years old. News of his death quickly spread, and fans were devastated. Tributes on social media quickly poured, and his wife Vicky said, "Chris's death is a loss that escapes words and has created an emptiness in my heart that will never be filled." Cornell's brother Peter also penned a tribute on Facebook, calling the late singer an icon and legend. He wrote, "Artists, actors, musicians. We rely on these people to lift us up, to inspire us and distract us in times of trouble. Chris protected us when we needed him to. His one-of-a-kindness surrounded us like a suit of armor. He was a warrior and a wizard, a howling wolf and a trusted mentor." Cornell's friends from the music industry also mourned his death. Elton John called him the loveliest man. Jimmy Page said that he was incredibly talented, and Tony Iommi said that Cornell was one of his favorite singers. A private memorial service that was attended by friends and family was held at the Hollywood Forever Cemetery, and his gravesite was open for public viewing afterward. Hundreds of fans flocked to the cemetery to pay their final respects to Cornell. According to the autopsy report, Chris Cornell's official manner of death was suicide. Toxicology tests were also done, and the results revealed that he had drugs in his system, including naloxone, butalbital, lorazepam, norpseudoephedrine, caffeine, and pseudoephedrine. However, the medical examiner noted that the ingestion of said drugs did not contribute to his death. If you or anyone you know is having suicidal thoughts, please call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-TALK, 8255.